Dear ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Good afternoon. Welcome to the lecture today, organized by the Hong Kong Youth Center of Buddhist Studies. Today we are very pleased and honored to have invited Venerable Matthieu Ricard to give a lecture on the theme, the Altruism Revolution. To begin with, I'd like to invite Professor C.F. Lee, founder of our center, to give the welcome speech. Professor Lee, please.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our distinguished speaker, is so well known that he doesn't really need much in the way of introduction. Probably I need an introduction of myself more than he does. But given a job, let me try to say a couple of words. We all know our good friend, our old friend, Venerable Matthieu Ricard. Welcome back to Hong Kong. Welcome back to University of Hong Kong. He's, what should I say, a legendary Buddhist monk, a prolific author, translator, photographer, and the founder of Karuna Shichen. He earned his PhD in Paris in biology in a field called cell genetics. Happened to be the same field as our previous Vice Chancellor, Professor Lev Chi-Chui, genetics. But Venerable Matthieu Ricard studied under Nobel laureate Francois Jacob. After completing his doctorate degree in the year 1972, we actually graduated in the same year with PhD, but in different parts of the world. He decided to concentrate on Buddha study and practice. Since then, he has lived in India, Bhutan, Nepal, and has studied under some of the most well-known, some of the greatest teachers of Tibetan Buddhism. He's an active participant in scientific research on the effects of meditation on the brain. I'm not sure whether anybody had report to you on the neuroscience project we have here at the University of Hong Kong. Maybe Venerable Hin Hong could tell you a bit more. For the last 4 or 5 years, we've been studying with a team of neuroscientists and psychology on the neuroscientific impact of meditation. They have published a bunch of papers on that. Anyway, so we are more or less in that same field of interest. Venerable Matthieu Ricard, he lives in Nepal now. He donates all his proceeds from his many books, and more importantly, much of his time to over 140 humanitarian projects in Asia. I don't know how he did it. I find it hard to manage 2 or 3. He has 140. Today, he will tell us under the heading of the Altruism Revolution. Specifically, he'll tell us how can the power of compassion change ourselves and change others around us. In fact, he has shared his idea about altruism revolution with great success in the West over the years. So without further ado, let's warmly welcome our old friend back, Venerable Matthieu Ricard, to enlighten us on altruism revolution. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Professor Lee. Thank you, Venerable Hin Hong, for this kind invitation. It's true, I feel like quite at home coming back here at HKU. We were trying to find out if the first time was 30 years ago or 20 years ago, but we all get a bit older and our brain is decaying in some memory area. So, but it's a great pleasure and to share the idea of a peaceful altruism revolution. So, the concept of revolution has different connotation in different places. In South America, they love that. Now, when I say "Viva la Revolución del Altruismo," everybody go "Viva la Revolution." I tried, in Monaco, in south of France, no reaction. So North America also said, I'm not sure about revolution, they're a bit worried about it. So, yes, why revolution? Well, of course, it's on the way. Maybe sometime it's already happened. Sometimes we don't even notice some of the revolutions that are taking place. And so maybe that's one thing I'm going to try to show, is somehow that in many ways it had happened, even though when we look at the media, we are overwhelmed by images of violence, tragedies. In North America, they speak of the narcissistic epidemic, the generation me. But still, there's so many, what we could call the banality of goodness. So I guess that when we finish our meeting today, when we come out, hopefully we are not going to say, how nice, nobody got a fight in this room. Well, why? Because of the banality of goodness, because most of our life, most of the time, is made of, living decently, in a civil way, in a sort of considerate way to each other. And if it does happen that two people have a fight somewhere, then there will be the talk of the place for quite a while. There was this French Buddhist monk talking about altruism, and two people managed to pick up a fight. So because it will be something out of what we expect. And evolution has actually equipped us to react something on the fringe, potentially dangerous, that needs to attract our attention because we might be in danger. So in a sense, that's kind of understandable that we try to pick up the most extreme behavior. And to say how extreme it is and how little sort of adequation with reality it is, you just have to know that in Western Europe and North America, a young person, I don't know about numbers in this part of the world, but a 20 years old young person has seen 40,000 violent deaths on TV or movie or something. A 10 years old already about 10,000. So what does that mean? How many 10 years old? I mean, I've been in quite, I would say various parts of the world in sort of, I was in the middle in Nepal of the Maoist insurgency. My hermitage happened to be right in the middle of the Maoist insurgency for 8 years. So one day we had the Maoists coming with guns, the next day the army was going after them with guns. But I saw a lot of dead people in my life, but I never saw under my eyes someone being killed because I'm not a war correspondent or something. So that's most of us, very few of us have seen, unless we are really in a war zone, but in ordinary life, nobody has seen that many. So there's a kind of distortion of reality that brings us to the wicked world syndrome. Man is bad, world is in terrible shape, it's kind of hopeless, we are going to unending downwards going spiral of violence and selfishness. Fortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case, and I'm going to show a few points about that. But not only that, it's maybe a time where the concept of altruism, cooperation, is more relevant than ever. First of all, because we are facing some serious challenges, obviously, for so many reasons. We are at a time of major changes, and we could say that we are in the position of this person, that a few steps in the wrong direction might end up in some kind of catastrophe. So that can be in our own life. We might find ourselves completely destitute, homeless, even in the midst of plenty. And actually, to be destitute in the midst of plenty is even more painful than to be destitute with everyone else is sort of not having many means. There is something called the paradox of the happy poor that has been studied in the slums in Calcutta. It's not that it's desirable to be forever living in a slum, but in fact the people there show quite a high degree of happiness. I saw one of them on a documentary made by the psychologist who studied that. The coming home, kind of home is like really a shackle with tin sheets, and saying, I'm so happy when you see my beautiful home and my beautiful children. He's not making it up. But if you are in the street, maybe here or in San Francisco or in New York or in Paris, of course the contrast and the fact that you are so much left outside society is much more painful. So this is something that we may face, but there's also on our own life. Our mind can be our best friend, like this obviously very, I won't say blissful, but someone who radiates contentment and peace, like one of the teachers I met in 1967. It's not my main teacher, but someone very wonderful I met in Darjeeling, Pao Rinpoche. Or our mind can be our worst enemy. We may endlessly ruminate about the past, anticipate about the future, and we know, for instance, that one of the aggravating factor for relapse in depression is constant rumination. So that's our own mind. It's mind-made problems that could possibly be solved by mind-made solutions. But it's not only that, not only societal, not only personal. We're also at the edge in another way. It is the first time in our history that human beings have now become the main factor that determines the quality of life of forthcoming generations. 10,000 years ago, there was between 1 to 5 million human beings on Earth. No big deal. Hunter-gatherers, whatever they would do, there would be hardly any trace on the environment. They were living in harmony. They were not considering animals as inferior, but as just different. Anyway, when you are chased by a jaguar or a tiger, you don't feel so superior. I have a tigress for the last 2 years running around my hermitage. I tell you, I'm not going to prove her that man is superior of the beast. I'm just very careful not to give her myself as breakfast. So, but this has changed. Not only the world population, but the tools that the world population at its disposal has been magnified 10, 100, 1,000-fold because of the technological, scientific, industrial revolution. So our impact on the planet, especially maybe around 1950, the great acceleration, we entered the Anthropocene, the first geological age where human activities are the main factor to shape the surface of Earth. And that is not a small thing, but also it took us by surprise. In a way, because it came gradually, nobody woke up in the morning deciding to do that, so there's a dilution of responsibility, so I don't feel responsible for global warming, even I take too many planes, because everybody does that and say, why should I only me stop doing that? And I didn't plan that, I didn't decide that. And it's happened slowly. I have a friend who is a great environmentalist scientist who said, what a pity that CO2 is not pink. Because if the sky will become pinker every day, we'll start worrying a little bit. The second thing is, although it's happened fast in geological terms, but it's still relatively slow at our human level. It's not tomorrow. And if it's in 30 years, well, suppose I say there is a rhinoceros coming full speed in the room now. So everybody jumps. If I say there will be a rhinoceros coming full speed in 30 years, people say, so what? We'll see. So that's what we know when the first scientists came to the White House saying, in 50 years there could be a major upheaval. They say, well, come back in 49 years, we'll see. The problem is there are tipping points. like this is what we call a tipping point. So now, if you say as a head of state of a, I mean, maybe I will say one day, but I don't want to put the blame on anyone. But someone really said that some time ago. They said, 5 years ago we were at the edge of the precipice, now we made a big step forward. So that's what happened if you make a big step forward. Here, you plunge. So how can we remember this limit, this tipping point? Well, scientists have defined a number of this kind of area. Actually, it's not as marked as the edge of the precipice. We don't know exactly, but roughly, this is an area, if we look at those different factors, if we remain within certain limits, then humanity could continue to prosper for another 50,000 years. Like we did for last 12,000 years. You know, the last 12,000 years, called the Holocene, has been the most remarkably stable in terms of climate and temperature for 200,000-300,000 years. Before it was up and down, actually not so much, 4-5 degrees. But that shows how dramatic those 4-5 degrees can bring change, from glaciation to warming up. And that's how, for nearly a million years, human population never went above 1 or 2 millions. Almost disappeared on a few occasions. So then, because of this remarkably stable weather, human civilization flourished. But now the flourishing might be a cause of disruption. So we could remain within those parameters. In 1900, for what we could extrapolate from now, we were well within the safety, limits of safety. In 1950, the great acceleration, we can see the overuse of agricultural land, climate change is starting to really happen, but still it seems to be under control. Now, imagine what's going to be next. How far are we gone? So here we are. In 2010, and now there's a revised estimate, but I don't have the image, but it's looking something like that, and even worse. You can see that on many counts, we've gone over the limits of safety. So it's not exactly we're at the tipping point, but we're at the edge of a place where most probably there will be points of no return. Climate change seems to be one of them. Sometimes we have this tendency to always underestimate the potential danger. The person who was one of the main scientists to do those diagrams, called Johan Rockström from Sweden, once I asked him, he was telling about the risk of having 2 degrees, 4 degrees, 6 degrees of global warming. And then he said, 6 degrees is probably a risk of 1.8%. So I thought, that's not going to move any people's mind. 1.8%, I can live with that. But he said, well, think about that. Aeroplanes. A risk of 1.8% would mean 17,000 major airplane crashes every day, because one aeroplane out of 60 will crash. Nobody will take a plane. Who will want to take? I will be dead long time ago. I take about 60 planes a year, so I'll be dead. So everybody will stop. So it's a huge risk, in fact. But we don't see it that way. It's very hard for us to imagine that. For instance, the loss of biodiversity at the current rate of losing species on Earth, by 2050, we'll have lost 30% of all species. 30%. That's the 6th major extinction since life is on Earth. The 5th one going back down to the time of the dinosaur disappeared, and many other species as well. That's a huge upheaval on Earth. So this is something that is not so far away. So that's why we are at a time of challenge. And we need to answer those challenges in the right way. Of course, it is possible. We keep on saying that, but the mere fact that it is possible and it's not too late, if you keep on waiting at some point, when you are already 1 foot above the edge, might be a bit too late. So the fact it should not be a consolation that is not too late, because it's not too late, but it will require a lot of commitment. So what can we do? We can wait. Here I'm looking at the glacier melting in the Himalayas. I've been doing that for almost 40 years. And I promise you they melt. And if you ask some Tibetans in the high plateaus, they've never heard of global warming. They don't read the newspaper. They don't listen to BBC radio either. They all tell you that the rivers they used to cross for 3 months with big trucks or yaks, now it's about a month. They tell you that it's not as cold as before, there's not as much snow as before. It's just common knowledge compared to 20, 30 years ago. That was the great acceleration in 1950, increase of carbon dioxide, water use, and for instance, methane. So why this Buddhist monk is speaking about methane? What this has to do with the Buddhist studies? Well, it has to do with the Buddhist concept of interdependence. It has to do with the Buddhist concept of compassion. Why? Well, this is the first time I tried to make the parallel, so I hope I'll get through the argument. While methane seems innocuous, in fact, it's much more active than CO2. And where does it come from? Industrial farming for meat production. So that's the situation. Why so much methane? Because all the animals, the digestion of the animals, all that produce a lot of methane, which is 20 times more active for greenhouse gas effect. This is due to a vastly increased consumption of meat. In the USA, 120 kilos per head per inhabitants. In India, only 3 or 4. Africa, 4 or 5. Europe, about 80. Luxembourg, world record, 132 kilos of meat per year. I don't know why they are so keen. But anyway, why does that have to do with interdependence? What does that have to do with compassion? Well, this is a typical case where everybody is losing. So if you have compassion, you don't want people to suffer. Who is that everybody? First, of course, the animals. They are the first victims of the whole system. That's 60 billion land animals killed every year for our various kind of use. That's 1,000 billion, that's 1 trillion sea animals for the same purpose, which means 150 million per hour. That's what we could call a zoocide, mass sort of killing of those animals. So they are the first loser, but they are not the only one. It also reflects on human life in many ways. Inequalities, poverty. Why is so? Well, to start with, 1.4 billion people could be reasonably fed with the 775 million tons of grain that is shipped from Latin America, Africa, to northern countries like North America and Europe and other places for meat production. So, and not only that, but it's a reverse protein factory. You need 10 kilos of good vegetable protein to make 1 kilo of meat. So that's a disastrous, return on input. So there's a social injustice in that excessive meat consumption. And it happens because of the methane that this industry has become the second cause of greenhouse gas effect. It's according to the latest IPCC, the UN report, and the FAO, it's about 15% of greenhouse gas effect after habitations and before transports, before the cars, the jet planes, and the ships and so forth. So, as you see, this is a major factor that will harm future generations. So in that sense, and then you will think, well, at least it may be good for human health. Well, I wish it was. I mean, I don't wish it was because it's a kind of ethically not very defendable position, but it is not, by far. I mean, there's every single comparative studies done on 10 years, 18 years for some of them in the United States, in Europe, Australia, ranging from 10,000 to 100,000 subjects, have found that people who consume meat 5 times a week compared to those who take 1 time a week or less have a 15% increased yearly risk of death from cancer and cardiovascular disease. So it's no good for anybody. Everybody is losing, first the environment, future generations, the animals themselves, poverty in the world, and even human health. So you can see that this is a typical example, although it's one showcase of one example, but it shows that everything is interdependent. And that's bring me to the idea that what will be some kind of concept that could allow to work together for a better world. Because if you take the majority of people, whether it's economists, social workers, scientists, I mean, with a few exceptions, there's always 1 or 2% of psychopaths in any population. But basically, we'll be so happy if we could find a way to go toward a better world. You know, even at the World Economic Forum, which is supposed to be, the mecca of finance and all that, the motto is to work towards a better world. But we need some kind of unifying concept. Because when you see economists who mostly, at least, or not economists, but people who work in investment and all that, of course they have to think of next month, next year, 5 years, relatively short term. There's very few who will issue treasury bond that mature in 100 years, right? So, but then come the environmentalists, they tell you something that will happen in 50 years. So classical economists say, I can understand, but it's not part of my work. So it's very hard to have a common platform. Of course, there are specialists of economy who deal with the climate issue, like Lord Nicholas Stern, who made a report saying it's going to cost 20 times more to repair the damage than to do something now, but it's not the same people who pay the bill. And there'll be 200 million climate refugees in certain time, but no, it's not now. So it's very hard. And then, so one of the main challenges is to reconcile 3 time scale. The short term of the economy and the immediate needs of people like those homeless. The mid-term, the quality of life. After all, how do we judge life satisfaction? Over 10 years, 20 years, a lifetime, a career. And then the long term of the environment, of course, is getting shorter and shorter, but still it's a matter of 50 years, 100 years, generations to come. So how can we find a common concept that allows us to work together, all people of goodwill, which is, I believe, the majority of us, for a better world? So there's no other concept that I can find, and I discussed that over the last 10 years with people from many walks of life, scientists, psychologists, social workers, politicians, economists, and there's really only one. It's having more consideration for others. It's just as simple as that. That means altruism. The definition of altruism is to have an intention, a motivation to benefit others. And that has to be at one point, at one time, in one thought, your primary goal. So it's not to do something possibly beneficial to others, calculating that you are going through that to maximize your personal interest, and that's your main reason to do that. That will be, of course, not genuine altruism. But there are moments in our minds where only thing we want, toward a child, toward someone, may that person be happy, I wished so, I'm going to do something, and that's our main motivation, so that's altruism. So having more consideration for others will, in the realm of economy, lead to something what we could call caring economics. There are respected economists who have taken up that concept. One of them is Dennis Snower. He's the founder of the Global Economic Symposium that takes place every year. And he points out that there's two things, that maximizing personal interest, that's the definition of the Homo economicus, maximizing personal preference and interest, can hardly do. One is to remedy to poverty in the midst of plenty. You don't maximize your personal interest by taking care of the poorest. You have to step out of that. The second thing is the problem of the common goods, the environment, everything that we share in common, quality of the air and so forth. You better be a free rider, let everyone make some strong efforts to do something for the environment and yourself do nothing. That will be maximizing your personal interest. So you have to step out of that. And the voice of reason is not enough, because voice of reason to take you, just maximize your personal interest and fly low, and that's fine. So you need the voice of care along with that. So that's a way that consideration for others will impact the short term. For the midterm, is looking towards flourishing, the conditions for people to flourish. Gross national happiness or many other concepts, similar concepts have been put forward to measure life satisfaction. Because if someone is in a country that is the richest and the most powerful and everyone somehow feels miserable and stressed and anxious and depressed, what's the point? So in that sense, we need to have more consideration for others to provide better social justice, reduce inequalities, offer access to education, and so forth. And then, of course, if we have more consideration for others, you will not jeopardize the only planet we have. That means the fate of billions and billions and billions of people to come in the future. Of course, and then, when I wrote this big book, too big book on altruism, I didn't plan, for instance, why it became so big, because as I was going, I realized that more and more important matters fell within the scope of altruism versus selfishness. I had not the slightest intention to spend months writing a chapter on environment. But when I thought about it, I thought it's complex politically, scientifically, economically. In the end, it is a matter of altruism versus selfishness. Because if I don't care for future generation, what's the problem? I'm not going to be there. So no problem. None of us will be there in 150 years. So why should we care unless we have this caring attitude? My favorite Marxist, Groucho Marx, said, why should I care for future generation? What did they do for me? Well, I heard a US billionaire saying on Fox News, he was told about the rise of the ocean that he could hardly deny because it's happening. But what he was saying is, I find absurd to change my behavior now for something that will happen in 100 years. That is the serious version of Groucho Marx. Unfortunately, that's more common than what we think. So that means that if we have this concept of more consideration for others, then this is like the magical thread that gives us a common platform towards a better world. At least now, the economists who care can talk with the environmentalists, can talk with social workers, with politicians, with people who try to reach social justice, and so forth. There is a common platform to build a better world. So is it possible? Do we have that capacity for altruism and consideration for others? Or if it has not fully happened, is it because, as some have said, like Hobbes, the philosopher, said, our life is a constant war of every man against every other man. Well, there's plenty of people saying things like that. Man is a wood for man, said Plaute. Well, first of all, there are many people who lived long time with wolves. They said they are very nice social animals. You just have to know them a little bit. And in any case, not every man and woman is cruel, merciless with every other man and woman. This is just complete sort of dogma, extreme fabrication. Still, and I was surprised when I did the research because Buddhism is all about putting compassion at the heart of your life and your practice. And I grew with wonderful parents that also told me that having a good heart is something that is essential in one's life. So I didn't grow in an environment where, as Freud said, I've discovered very little good in humans. From what I know, most of them are rascals. If you start with that, then you don't feel very good as a starting point. Is that true? I don't think so. Actually, there's not a single scientific study that supports the theory of universal selfishness. Philosophers have said that it's sort of very childish philosophy. Scientists have said this is armchair science. There's not a single study ever to prove that idea. Rather the opposite, in fact. First of all, we know that cooperation is one of the most rewarding activities. In hunter-gatherers societies, cooperation was at the heart of the society, very egalitarian, everyone working together. If free riders don't last in egalitarian society, they are ostracized, they don't survive. But this is something we have also gained through evolution. It's a genuine photograph, no tricks. Now, of course, we heard of social Darwinism, the survival of the fittest. But that was mostly, Herbert Spencer. You used to call Darwin's bulldog, not without reason. He invented that concept of the survival of the fittest. Darwin actually spoke much more of cooperation than competition. Yes, there is the struggle for life. There is a winner and a loser. But if you look at more recent work on the theory of evolution, there is now a growing consensus that, of course, competition exists. And in all what I'm going to say, I'm not denying that selfishness exists, that competition exists. We don't have to write a book about that, because most people think that it exists. Not only it exists, but only that exists. So what I'm trying to prove is the other aspect exists as well. So in fact, it seems that although competition does exist, that cooperation has been much more creative in evolution to go to increasing step of complexity, to go from multicellular to symbiosis and all kinds of levels of leading to social animals who live like a very tightly working community. So it's thanks to this cooperation that this complexity arises. And even if you look at our own life, there was a survey by the OCDE about the 10 factors that people feel contributes most to their well-being. And so among them there was many factors like health and income and so forth. Income came about ranked number 5 or 6, I can't remember exactly. Number 1, for sure, was quality of human relationship. That means at work, within your family, this is what impacts most on well-being according to people, and this is the case. We know that if you have a dense, rich, wide array of constructive social relationship, you live longer, you have better health, less addiction, and so forth and so forth. If you are alone in the midst of plenty, you can choose to be alone like a hermit in the mountains, but you fully enjoy that. But it's against your will. You are sort of alone in society and not taken care of, and have no one to ask for help, no one to ask for advice, no one to confide to if you are in difficulty. This is a very deleterious situation for your longevity, for your health, and for many other aspects. And this is not limited to human beings. Now there are 5 or 6 hotspots in the world for centenarian. One of them in South California. They're all sort of vegans community, but this one is in Okinawa in Japan. They are not, so the people who studied that, they found that the main characteristic is those people are together throughout life. Those centenary grandmothers, they go at the end of the school, when the kids come out of the school, and they wait with sweets, and even they don't have their own grandchildren, they all hug them, and they sort of live, they feast together, they song, they sing, they dance together, nobody is left out. And they all say that it is because of that that we sort of seems to have a lot of centenaries. So it seems that, this doesn't come from selfishness, of course. It means that we care for others, that we feel that we are this common humanity, this sense of belonging, the sense of affiliation actually is a very important factor for well-being and happiness. Now, let's return a little bit to this idea that we could be universally selfish. Many people have said that. Some people said, scratch at the surface of an altruist and the selfish will bleed. That means if you're really smart, go deep enough, you will always find a selfish motivation, no matter what the beautiful behavior seems like. Well, it is true. There are just facades of altruism. I mentioned the fact of doing something in a very interested way. You do something, a favor to someone, you do something beneficial to someone. All you are thinking is to get something bigger in return. You're calculating. Or you may just do that because people will praise you. You're very generous. You're a famous philanthropist. People praise you all over the place. Or because you would feel guilty and would feel bad about not doing something. So you prefer to feel good. Or because something called empathic distress. If I see someone who is suffering and wounded and I have no escape, and I can't stand it because I feel bad because of seeing that, then best thing to do is to help if I have no other way. I just relieve the suffering because I can't stand it, not so much because I care. So that happens. So that's not genuine altruism. But is it always that we can find something? Well, this has been said by some psychologists, but then there are others who really studied that in the lab. Someone like Daniel Batson, a psychologist from Kansas, and he spent about 25 years with his team putting people in various situations in the lab, and each time giving them possibility of escape, of choosing the selfish solution or alternative, and he found that no matter what kind of special situation he could set, there will be 30-40% of people who systematically behave in an altruistic way, even they are the easy choice to behave selfishly. So that's the good news. It does exist. But still, some people might not be convinced. For instance, you hear of somebody, suppose somebody is a very generous person doing anonymous sort of generosity. Someone who makes a donation to save the life of 10 children, nobody knows about it, so he doesn't expect praise. There's no reason he should feel bad if he doesn't do it because nobody will know, nobody expects it. And he doesn't expect that those people that he saved the life will come and shower with praise and gratitude and all this stuff. But that he might say to his best friend, I did that, and then he says, that was one of the best things I did in my life. I feel so good about that. So if that best friend happened to be one of those psychologists who believe in universal selfishness, they say, haha, you did that for the warm glow. You did that because you feel good. But it does happen. Once I was invited to a round table in France with a leading sort of, I would say, CEO and stuff like that, and there was the head of a private bank there, and he kept on saying that he started to do philanthropy because he felt so good about that. He said, you can't believe how good I felt to do that, so I'm just doing it because I really like to feel like that. So he was a typical example of someone who was doing it just for feeling good. But now, is it really the case all the time? I think I better put the sound here. Not too loud, okay? So look at this. by the way, when I showed that in Argentina, they said, oh, this is my train. This was their city. I take that train every day. So anyway, okay. So do you think those people who jump on the tracks to save someone or jump in icy water to save a child, they think, oh, I'm going to feel so great when this is over? Of course not. But then it's not finished. They're interviewed and by the local radio, and they said, I had no choice. How could I not do that? I saw this person going to be killed. How can I not jump? Not everybody jumped, but for that person it was obvious. So then comes the universal selfishness psychologist. Of course, don't worry, they are not all like that. But some are quite stubborn. And they say, oh, no choice. No choice is no altruism. It's automatic behavior. It's neither selfish nor, if you do something instinctively without thinking, there's no motivation. So how can you call that altruism? Well, I discussed that with Daniel Batson. He's probably the world specialist of altruism in psychology, and many other people, Buddhist scholars and so forth. I think everybody agree that, of course, there's a choice, and that choice, ethics is not just about what is good to do, but also what is good to be, to become. So if you cultivate loving kindness, concern, care for others, when something happens suddenly, you don't have to think forever. The choice is obvious. There is a choice, but it takes just a fraction of a second. It's the expression of what you are. So if someone is like that, the choice takes only a fraction of a second. And for instance, why should that person think for half an hour whether he should give the hand or not? This doesn't make sense. It doesn't mean that the person has no choice. He's not stupid. He's taking risk. It's complicated. It's difficult. There's a choice, but that choice doesn't take, having to weigh the pros and cons and stuff like that. And even animals have choice. It's not an easy position. So there's a choice, no? It's easier to let go, still holding on. And there are people who had a choice, and dramatic choices, and over a long time, and with no benefits to expect. There are many of the rescuers of people persecuted in times of genocide. It has happened everywhere, in Rwanda, in Serbia, but it was more studied after the Second World War, of people who rescued those who were persecuted by the Nazi regime, mostly like Jewish persons and others as well. So there have been hundreds of rescuers. And they did that, were people who were just about to be sent to the concentration camp, who were desperate. They didn't know them. They had nothing to expect in return. There was a great danger to be denounced by your neighbors, and yourself and your whole family would be deported. And you had to hide them for months sometimes and face constant threat. There was no question of warm glow. There was no question of split-second decision. It was a constant renewal of a determination without concession that they will protect them. And this is, for instance, what did it looks pretty happy and peaceful, isn't it? So this Pastor André Trogme and his wife, they should put statues of him almost every city in Paris, in France. With his wife and the whole village of a place called Chambon-sur-Lignon. It's a village in the Haute-Loire. It's a mountainous village not far from the Swiss border in southeast of France. They saved 3,500 Jewish persons who were running away from the Gestapo, from the Vichy French regime that collaborated with the Germans. They never closed their door to anyone who sought refuge coming, in the night, in the middle of the winter, knocking at the door. They hid them. They have a complicity over the village. They put them in the woods. They brought them to Switzerland through all kinds of ingenious means, taking great risk over a long time. And they said, how could we have done otherwise? This is completely are sort of natural. They felt there was the thing to do very simply, and they did over a long time, so they had the choice. And also we do have this faculty for empathy. This is a Chinese person who lost his leg when he was 5 years old, and all his life he has been caring for others, and with obviously some sense of joy. So we have this faculty to resonate with others, be empathic to others, be compassionate to others. Now, if we look at the various nuances of all that, altruism is basically, if you just take the Buddhist definition, is the wish that others may be happy and find the cause of happiness. And the cause of happiness can go very far, because it means also inner freedom and wisdom and so forth. But let's not dwell too much in detail about that, but wishing that someone be happy and find the cause of happiness. Compassion is the shape that altruistic love takes when it meets with suffering. That means it becomes the wish, may this person suffering and the causes of suffering be removed. And may we extend that wish to all sentient beings, including animals, whoever makes the difference between happiness and suffering. So what is empathy? Empathy is a kind of relatively new term, late 19th century. It was feeling into someone else. It started with artists who thought what it will feel to be like a mountain. And then they would draw mountains or do things like that. But then soon it came into psychology, and it is emotional empathy. Is if you have a big smile, I smile, I'm happy because you look happy. You suffer, I suffer because I see you suffering, and that suffering is real. Neuroscientists have shown that yes, all the network of suffering is activated in the brain when you see someone suffering and you resonate empathically. Now, imagine that's all you have. Empathic resonance again and again and again. And maybe as a caretaker of a social worker or a nurse or a doctor, day after day you're confronted, you resonate with the suffering of others. Their patient changed, but you are still there and you do suffer with them. Well, 60% of all North American medical personnel will or are suffering of burnout, emotional exhaustion, excessive empathic distress. So we studied that with Tanya Singer. She's a neuroscientist at the Max Planck Institute of Leipzig, and she's probably one of the world specialists of empathy. So, I've been running around like a flying guinea pig for quite a few years, going from one lab to another. I know every single possible type of fMRI machine, all the different brands and how narrow, how dark they are in Princeton and Madison and everywhere. So I went to her lab, and then we started to explore that phenomena. So she asked me to go in the scanner. We were doing real-time fMRI, which you can see immediately what's happening. And we're just doing some kind of testing. And I could hear her. After 10 minutes, she said, "What are you doing?" I was trying to do, loving kindness and compassion meditation. And she said, "Well, it's nothing we see normally with empathy." I said, "Well, I'm doing compassion meditation." She said, "What's that? Come out, we have to talk." So we did talk, and we explored that, and I figured out that, people speak of compassion fatigue, and I could not conceive of compassion fatigue, but empathy fatigue, yes, if you just resonate with suffering and that's all you have, it's too much. Yes, you burn out. So then she asked me, since we mostly know about empathy, could you meditate on empathy only? You just leave your compassion on the side? So once we reported that to the Dalai Lama, he says, "How can you do that, If you see suffering, you feel compassion." They say, "Well, of course it's very artificial, but it means thinking suffering again and again. You just focus on the suffering and try to, each time some warm feeling come out, just let it be out and just refocus on suffering." So try to this basic resonance with suffering. So I went back in the MRI and did that. I visualized, I'd seen a documentary on the BBC with Romanian orphans who were such an incredibly terrible condition. And then I'd been in Tibet, in the area where there was an earthquake in 2010, and thinking of all these people, trapped under the rubble, children, women, elderly. It was not difficult to resonate like that. So I did that, and within an hour, we do usually what we call blocks. 1 minute rest, 1 minute empathy, because you need to compare, not just to rest because you are tired, but you need to see differences. That's what we measure. So within an hour, I felt completely burned out. I was in heavy empathic distress. So then Tanya told me through the mic, it's already 1 hour in MRI, that we have gone over already the authorized time for a subject to be in MRI machine. But Buddhist guinea pigs are quite sturdy. So I said, well, I'm happy to stay more because I really want to move to compassion meditation. I have to rescue myself. Don't just take me for lunch with this empathic distress. So then I moved to compassion meditation, and it was completely different. It was like opening a dam of just, instead of those children which I didn't know how to touch them, they were so frail, everything you touch them seems to be suffering, just like feeling like a mother, all embracing. And there's an expression that this Bhante Nepola Gunaratna wrote, it's like every atom of suffering is filled with atom of love. And it's completely different feeling. It's very constructive, very embracing, it's courageous, it's uplifting, this determination to extend that love to everyone. So it's a very constructive way to deal with the suffering of others. It's not that you think suffering is fine, don't worry, you will get better. It's not that. It's the way you relate in a constructive way instead of freaking out yourself. And that was a complete difference. You could see, like if you have some lights on and some light off, all the light off were on and all the off went on. The areas of connected with fear and basic emotion of fear and anger, amygdala was turned down, area related with sense of affiliation and maternal love were turned on, positive affect were turned on, sort of this sense of reward and wholesomeness was turned on, and so forth and so forth. So a very different pattern in the brain. So we continue to study that and publish a paper showing that the networks of compassion and empathy are completely different in the brain. And also the idea that you could remedy to burnout by training on metta, loving kindness. And that's what Tanya's been doing then, using 350 subjects over 1 year. And the result of the study showed that this actually works. If you just ask people to do empathy, normal volunteers, they sort of become very upset within a few days. If you add the compassion meditation, it doesn't happen. So compassion meditation is like an antidote to empathic burnout. So it needs to be embedded in altruistic love. And that's also when you see doctors, nurses who have this human warmth, then it's different. They usually don't burn out. So okay, so we have these different factors: altruism, altruistic love, compassion, empathy. So now we know, I could not give you in details all the 30 years of investigation and 30 different experiments that Daniel Batson did, but they all comfort the idea of what we call empathic concern, which is, yes, many of us are altruistic at some point. There is the idea that only selfishness doesn't stand to analysis, investigation. So, but then we say, okay, fine, but still the world is not in the ideal position, so what can we do to go to a better world? So we need two things. We need individual change and societal change. So is individual change possible? So, and then is societal change possible, or cultural change? So first, let's look at quickly like individual change. Well, the idea was to the cooperation of Buddhist practitioners and scientists to see if what Buddhists have been doing for 2,500 years, which is to train the mind, to transform themselves, to cultivate fundamental human qualities like altruistic love and compassion, are they just sort of making themselves comfortable in their hermitage? Is it just an illusion, or are they actually changing what they are? So, from the experiential side, anyone who spends years in meditation on altruistic love, cannot but notice that they have become a bit different person. But you may not convince everyone about that. But now, what is sort of possibly useful for society about the collaboration with neuroscientists is that when we took not the great masters like Khyentse Rinpoche or Kangjo Rinpoche, my two first main teachers, but you take some of their students and who have done 10 to 50,000 hours of meditation, and you see vast structural and functional difference in their brain. I mean, when they engage in compassion meditation, there's very different pattern of activation than for beginners. So you study long-term meditators, good meditators like this one, and you have to compare with bad meditators like this one, because you need a control group, what we call. So here's with Richard Davidson, who is one of the leading scientists who have done that for the last 15 years. So I'm not going, I think last time I went more in detail about those studies, but just to remind of one result, for instance, in brain imaging. Here you see long-term meditators at rest and engaging in compassion meditation. You can see some areas are very strongly activated. Those are affiliation, empathy, positive affect, and so forth. And if you look at the brain of novice meditators, 1 week, you don't see anything happen at rest, and neither in meditation. They have not been trained, as you don't expect that. So, but the difference is striking between this and that. Now you will say, well, that's good, but who can afford 60,000 hours of meditation? That's a lot. A musician who or she does their first concert, usually 10,000 hours is considered to be the threshold of expertise. So that's 6 times that. So that's quite a lot. Fortunately, it happens much earlier. Even after 4 weeks of mindfulness meditation, and now next thing we should do is caring mindfulness. I'll tell you why. So, because you get 2 for the price of 1. And it's so much more embedded with positive qualities than just being mindful. So anyway, after 4 weeks, you can see a change in the hippocampus, which is area of the brain that actually process novelty. When you train into anything, juggling, playing the piano, reading, singing, your hippocampus will change. So it does change if you do just 20 minutes a day of meditation. It doesn't change in the control group. That's what you expect. Now, 2 weeks of compassion meditation, 20 minutes a day, already changed your behavior more pro-social. Not only behavior, that area of the brain that has to do with fight or flight, anger and fear, the amygdala, is already, you can see it shrinking in volume. 2 weeks, 20 minutes a day. So you see, as soon as you start training into something, some changes are occurring. Other studies have shown that 3 months of mindfulness-based stress reduction lead to an increase of 30% of your immune system, the faculty to make antibodies if you get a flu vaccine, for instance. Now, the idea was, can we do that in a secular way, because we cannot impose in any worldwide schools, neither Buddhist or Christian or Muslim or any other religious ideas to everybody. But if we could do it using basic human values, basic human qualities in a secular way that will be acceptable to all, whether they're believer or non-believer, something that will not offend them. So that's, who can be against benevolence and compassion, no matter where you come from, whether you are agnostic or believer or anything. Nobody can be against benevolence. So could we do that with children? So Richard Davidson and his team did an intervention in Madison, Wisconsin, with preschoolers, 4 or 5 years old. 10 weeks, 40 minutes, 3 times a week. They said, so during that, they call that the kindness curriculum. So they have various exercise of kindness, of cooperation, of gratitude, of emotional awareness of the other state of mind, mindfulness breathing, like with this stone, all kinds of things, planting the seeds of friendship. I mean, I cannot describe the whole thing, but it is geared in a playful way to generate more kindness and pro-social behavior. So you would say, well, you know, they are very small kids. You know, how can it really make a difference in 10 weeks? Well, it does. You can see the increase of pro-social behavior compared to a control group, similar kids, similar school, no intervention. But then you need a real scientific hard-nosed test, and that's the stickers test. It's well known as the topmost scientific rigor. So how do you do that? So, well, before the 10 weeks, you try to find out for each child who is their best friend, who is their least favorite child. That's a politically correct way to say the child that they cannot stand. And then you put another envelope with the unknown child and the sick child, and you give them stickers and say, please put it in any envelope you want. You have to give them away. So before the intervention, as you guess, they give everything to their favorite child. So now 10 weeks, 40 minutes, 3 times a week, you know, how is it going to make a difference? You know, the out-group, in-group discrimination is very, very strong in human beings. Look at soccer fans, you know. They just bash each other just for this silly stuff of different T-shirts. So, yet, look at this. 10 weeks, level down discrimination. Very easy intervention, cheap, and the post-study after 3 months showed that it remains. So you could also continue the intervention. The children love that anyway. So see how useful to society this kind of blend of contemplative science, modern science, educational science, and so forth could be to address one of the most difficult problems, that of discrimination between class, you know, social classes, ethnical division, religious division, name it, racial divisions. So, you know, this kind of intervention makes us feel that this collaboration can really, or Buddhist contemplative or Christian contemplative or whatever, bringing the best of their wisdom and experience in a secular way to benefit society could be fruitful. So we do that in our schools, in India. I mean, they're already in part of the culture, but still they're very happy to do so. So now individual change is possible. So is societal change possible? Well, first, it's already happening. That's kind of the good news. So you need, if you ask people today because of, you know, has violence declined in daily life? So many people will say because we are inundated with bad news about terrorist acts and things like that. And, you know, in Marseille, in south of France, you can buy Kalashnikov for $600. Anyone can get it. So you would tendency to say, well, you know, the suburbs and all that, you know, we don't feel very safe these days. Well, that's not the case. Oxford, 1350, 100 homicides per year per 100,000 inhabitants. Today, 0.6. Throughout Europe, it went down 50 to 100 times. Average is 1, except Sicily is 12. I don't know why. But that means it has never been so safe. Today is the time where we have the less probability to die of homicide ever in our history in Europe. And this is true almost everywhere, except a few hot spots, of course. So this is a tendency that also we sort of, you know, oversee, because we don't see in time, we don't know the numbers, so we only see the evening news with those terrible things. But even domestic violence, you know, towards children has gone half for some of the most serious abuse in 20 years in the United States. Now you would say, well, you know, there is ISIS, there is South Sudan, there is Iraq-Iran war, 1 million people died. So what about war, genocide, massacres? Well, there are 2 huge data banks, one in Uppsala in Sweden, one in North America, collecting all the data about all the conflicts in the world. The moment there are 20 people dead, whether it's a riot or a border conflict or anything, they take how many conflicts in 1 year, how many victims per conflict. So then, 1950, 60,000, now about 1,000. So there is always something terrible happening somewhere. If you look worldwide, vastly decreased. There's something happening there. But you know, the fact that it happens over centuries, sometimes we miss it. But please remember, like in Europe, 2-3 centuries ago, instead of going to see a football match or soccer match, however you call it, on Sunday afternoon, where would you take your wife and children? To see public torture, public hanging. On the wheel, they would break their bones, and people thought it's great stuff. No, they will take in reservation the Saturday. Everyone will come to see that because it's kind of distraction. There was a place in the east of France where a small city had not had a death execution like that by torture for months, so they bought a death sentence guy from another city because people were getting bored. It's a true story. The last witch was killed in Switzerland in 1825. It's not very long ago. I mean, still in Saudi Arabia, they execute people for witchcraft. But still, basically, we don't do that anymore. Torture has been abolished, even though, I mean, at least officially, torture, slavery, still going on, but it's against international laws, at least. So there is something that happened that is a progress towards civilization, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. You know, slavery it was not obvious. In 1789 or something in UK, 10 respected people said, we can't go on with slavery forever. And so they went to the House of Commons, and people laughed at them. They say, the British Empire will collapse economically if we don't have slavery. It's impossible. But 10 years later, the consciousness has shifted. The culture has shifted, and slavery was abolished. And today, if someone will say, well, it's not that bad, it makes sense. You make 100 people work for 1,000 people comfort. It's good economic calculation. But who would dare to say that? So it's gone. So there are clearly a civilization progress. There are still incoherence in that. I mean, we ascribe almost infinite value to human beings. We cannot treat human beings as instrument, for promoting our interest, but we still instrumentalize billions of animals which are, on a kind of continuum according to evolution, and have basically no intrinsic value unless it's commercial. So that's still a big gap, ethical gap in our progress to civilization, but basically we have made a lot of progress, and that might be the next one. But of course there are adverse forces. The very strong individualistic societies and cultures are on the rise in some areas. Look at, for instance, here, if you look at the song lyrics and you look at the vocabulary used, I, me, mine, we, us, and so forth, between 1980 and today. So this is the I, me, mine. And this is the we, us. This is pro-social words, anti-social words. So that was given to me by Jean Twenge, a psychologist who wrote 2 books. One is called Generation Me. The other one is called The Narcissistic Epidemics. And by the way, I just heard that the announcement speech of candidature of Donald Trump broke the world record. Within that short space, he managed to say 252 times I and me. So, well, that's the triumph of narcissistic individualism. So that's a danger. It's still sparing, Europe. It's coming. There have been analyses even in Scandinavian countries, which are the most not narcissistic and egalitarian. But over 10 years, they look at those kind of words in the press and the books, and it is on the increase. So we're not immune to that danger. But this being said, Now, how to go from individual change to societal change? This is the wonderful branch of evolution called the evolution of culture. They go faster than genes. To have an altruistic gene in human race would take 50,000 years, and there's no guarantee it will happen. Now, basically, over 10,000 years, probably 1 or 2 genes have changed. It's about using milk. Lactate was very useless in a way, but not altruism. So we are the same as Aristotle, same genes. He thought slavery was great. We don't. Culture changed, not basically human beings as such. So, but evolution of culture, 2 cultures can change much faster than that. Imagine a group of altruistic people. First of all, they like to be together because they're altruistic and usually nice people. So they like to work together. They like to cooperate. So now, if you think of ordinary natural selection, if you put 1-to-1, a selfish person against an altruistic one, always 1-to-1, the altruistic people will be wiped out of the map within no time because they are not mean, they try to compromise, and the other guys are merciless. Now you take a bunch of altruistic people who like to cooperate against a group of altruistic people who love to cooperate and work together, and you put them in comparison with a bunch of selfish people, individualistic, who kick each other's leg all the time. Of course, as a group, the other one will have a huge advantage because those guys are already against each other on top of it. So in that sense, models have shown that there's a possibility for, we already, as human beings, super cooperators, but to move to a next set of cooperation that we need to face the challenge of our time. So again, what are the solutions? Go back to the hermitage. Try to become a better human being, and then put that at the service of society. That's a good step. Now, besides that, we need to enhance cooperation. We need to have more cooperative learning in schools rather than competitive. Kids working together, those who are more gifted helping those who are less gifted or whatever. We need unconditional cooperation within communities and companies. There might be healthy competition between enterprises so that, to keep the sort of free market going. But within a company, there should be unconditional cooperation, sharing of information, teamwork, more egalitarian. There are many examples of, such companies being actually very prosperous and a good place to work. I met in Brazil Ricardo Semler. He would have been a billionaire, but he gave things as he was earning them. And he said once, actually, when he was asked about American philanthropy, that to give back to society, he said, well, if you have to give back to society, it means you took too much in the first place. But what he did, he inherited a big company from his father with 4,000 employees. And he thought, this whole hierarchical stuff is no good. He said, no more boss. And he told the people who were completely stunned, we are on the same boat, but you are going to fix your own salaries. Be careful. If you're not reasonable, we'll go bankrupt. Everyone will be in the ditch. And you are going to decide how much holiday you want to take. So people start working together, thinking what is the best for the company, how much we can reasonably have as salary. So they come to a consensus. And this was immensely prosperous. And then he used the benefit to do schools and stuff like that. I can tell you at least 10 examples like that. Of course, it's not yet worldwide, but there is a movement. One of the biggest fruit company in California, there's no boss. It's self-organizing units, people according to needs, according to demand. The hugest network of nurses in Holland works like that, no boss. There's a founder of the whole network, but they're sort of very flexible and so forth. So there's someone called Frederic Laloux who wrote an interesting book called Reinventing Organization. So anyway, enhancing cooperation is a good way. We need caring economics. I mentioned in the beginning, it can do 2 things which the selfish economy cannot do: remaining to poverty in the midst of plenty and taking care of the environment and common goods. We need sustainable harmony. The so-called sustainable development. Of course, if it's properly understood, it's fine, but development, we always think quantitative, more and more using of the resources, but we don't have 3 planets. If everyone would have as many cars, the US citizen now, we would need 6 planets. We don't have them, that's clear. So endless growth, quantitative growth is just not possible with a limited planet. But sustainable harmony means what? It means now remedying to inequalities. That's a scourge for societies, for the world in general. That's a source of conflict, of injustice, and so forth. We need also, in the long term, sustainable harmony means keeping within the planetary boundaries so that we can continue to prosper without undermining the biosphere to such extent that the future generation will dramatically suffer. We need local commitment. We need to do our own part, our own commitment, whatever we can. And global responsibility, like we now have the WHO for health, we should have a similar agency beyond national interest for the environment. That seems to be pretty obvious. We need to extend altruism to 1.3 other million species. I mean, they are not just there to entertain us, to fulfill our needs. There is 80,000 kinds of, I don't know in English how do you say, coleopters, we say in French. It's kind of beetle. 80,000 different species. I mean, why should there be 80,000 species just for the pleasure of human beings? They have their life on their own. Leave them alone. I mean, not alone. We are interdependent. We live with them. So we need to work as co-citizens of this world. Extreme animal rights people say, leave animals on their own, don't touch them, don't do anything. This is not possible. We are part of that interdependence as well. So we need to establish a way of living together so that we maintain the harmony of the biosphere. And then we need to dare altruism. It's not just a noble, naive, utopian idea. It's the most pragmatic solution to the needs of our time. We need to dare to say that, yes, it does exist along with selfishness. Yes, we can teach it in the schools in a secular way because we have the potential for it. Why not? Why sort of hesitating? The idea of neutral education is so stupid, frankly, because kids will pick up values anyway, but usually they'll pick them up in violent video games and stuff like that. So who could be against benevolence, honesty, tolerance, saying this is culturally loaded, we can't teach that some part of the world because it comes from another part of the world? Benevolence? No, it doesn't make sense. So we have to have basic human values and bring them. So that's what we need to say, and there's a possibility. So maybe the time has come for this revolution. Victor Hugo said there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. I think the time of cooperation and altruism has come. It's more than due time. And Martin Luther King said every man must decide whether he will walk in the light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. So that's our choice. And the Dalai Lama said, my religion is good heart. He doesn't mean that Buddhism doesn't have very deep philosophical views. It means that in the end, what really matters for a better world is to have and practice the good heart. So we are trying to do that with our humble ways through karuna, which means compassion, by the way. When I founded this organization in France is very secular, I wanted to call it compassion in action. They say, oh, it's too religious. So I call it karuna, means the same thing. Nobody knew, so it was fine. So then Karuna Sechen is the name of our monastery as well. So we have this clinic in Nepal that treats 40,000 patients a year. We have one of the 3 palliative care units in Nepal. We build bamboo schools. You can build a school with $100,000 for 2,000 kids in 3 months. We build a number of clinics in Tibet. We need bridges, of course, as you can see. This is our car. So we build a number of bridges everywhere. Elderly people's home, the happiest woman in the world. We build schools. We now have 25,000 children in the school that we build in India, Nepal, and Sichuan, or in Tibet. Try to have as many girls as possible. I spoke about the Yushu earthquake in 2010. where we help on the spot, and in the long term, we help 3,000 people over 2 consecutive winters. It's minus 20 Celsius there in the winter. And then, of course, recently in Nepal. So we have been implanted in Nepal at the grassroots level for last 15 years, and that allows us to be immediately in action. So we and a bunch of local NGOs working together. It was a dramatic earthquake, 700,000 homes were destroyed, 8,000 people lost their life. 4,700 schools were damaged or destroyed. So what we did, we put all our resources into that. There was first our clinic, 60 people there, our monastery, 600 monks. We work with a human rights organization, that National Election Observation Committee, who has the map of every village with how many people, how many households. So we work with them. That was a crucial help. Another Lux Nepal, who works in certain areas, so mostly grassroots people. Thanks to this collaboration, we could help 200,000 people in 3 months. And helping is not just patting them on the cheek and say, okay, please be well. We actually give them between 15 days to 1 month food. We treated patients, 8,000, like for instance, 600 tons of rice and all these things, food security, medical treatment, and so forth. So now the emergency period is over. It was quite a challenge to go to those 500-something villages out of nowhere, and sometimes by boat, sometimes by trucks, sometimes by carrying stuff. Where is it here for days? Quite a challenge, but we managed. And now we need to move to the next step, the community project, rehabilitation. And that has different aspects. Food security, providing seeds and sort of different things, outcome for their products, education, rehabilitating schools, continuing the health program, like with mother and child care. Of course, if there's still people who need medical assistance. We were going to bring solar electrification of those villages. We are going to prevent human trafficking, which is unfortunately quite common in Nepal. Children trafficking, women trafficking. So we work with 10 NGOs who are specialized in that, but when we go to the village, we immediately inform them. We start sensitizing people about it and try to make a more active intervention. So that's what we want to do for the next 2-3 years. There was an incredible outpour of solidarity from all over the world. Our Karuna was trusted because we only have a few % of overhead and is completely taken care by 1 or 2 benefactors, which means that 100% of the help goes directly to the field, and that somehow attracted some attention, and that we were not too big, not too small, and that's why we could help 200,000 people. So that's we want to continue, and then this is the kind of places where we work. Again, this is from my hermitage. Quite nice to have that at breakfast. This is other views from the Himalayas and in Tibet, and you can see the beauty of things. And there is a little girl that you might see on some of the brochures. She became unwittingly our Karuna girl. I met her in a kitchen near one of our clinics, I think 10 years ago, and she had this so beautiful, innocent sort of look. And then 2 years ago, I thought, where is she now? So I inquired, I showed the photo, I said, oh, I know her, she's in the nomad area, in the small school there that we built. So I finally found her. Here is she. And then I didn't know her name, so she's called Beautiful Ocean of Turquoise. I just had showed her that photo and said, your photo has been seen all over the world. She looked at me and said, this guy is just mad. What is he talking about? It didn't make any sense to her. But yes, it's true. She's been our kind of our mascot. And so anyone interested, please look at those projects. We are very happy if you are part of the Karuna family. We are also very egalitarian. I'm supposed to be the boss, but I hate these kind of titles. I'm a kind of creating chaos with my friends are trying to fix. Anyway, we are very hard to do something with pure heart and dirty hands. So if you want to be part of this, you're most welcome. So thank you. I think I've spoken too long, but
Thank you very much, Venerable Matthieu Ricard, for your inspiring lecture. So the section is now open to the floor. If you have any questions, please raise your hand.
Thank you. Oh, thank you very much for a wonderful talk. I'm a professor and I teach environment in a business school. And most of the kids already know that the world is ending. They've seen it already and they've seen the pictures and all that sort of stuff. And they know the numbers. And I want to know what you would tell them, because when you talk about doing good, all of them want to do good. But they say, I need to make money first. Right, and so I'll do good when I make money, because I have to go off and I have to go. I'm part of the system where I have to go and save all my money to help the family pay the mortgage so that I can get in my tiny little space in Hong Kong. And then later, then I want to do good. What do you? I'm sure you've been asked this before. What do you tell these young people?
There's a well-known ethical philosopher, Peter Singer, who wrote on many subjects, including animals and ethics. He wrote recently a book on what he called effective altruism. And he cited a number of people who said, well, if I go to work in an NGO with my two hands, that much I can do. If I earn $5 million and give half of it to save lives, I might do better. But for that, you really need a clear vision and a strong determination and not change your motivation. Because then, if you get $5 million and say, well, maybe I could get a Ferrari instead of saving a few lives. So you might risk of losing yourself in the means and forgetting the goals. And then the means keeps you busy till you die. So that's the problem. But there are people who decided that they will fix a certain amount of their revenue. They say, well, I don't need 2 cars, or I don't even need one. And they say, okay, I'll give 20%, 25% of my revenue yearly. And so therefore, for them, it's a good thing to earn. The risk of saying that is to somehow get lost in that consumerism and get lost in what we call the superfluous. Because most of the crises that we see when we speak of economic crisis, of course, it affects the poorest in poor country, and even in rich country, the poorest section is well known. The inequalities have continuously increased over the last 30 years in the OECD, which are the 36 or so richest countries. It's just increasing. So, the question is, don't you risk to get lost into that and lose your ideal? And so somehow, wouldn't it be better to find also a job that could be good? Well, yes, to say about the superfluous, so in wealthy countries, the crisis is mostly about getting things that we don't need. In the US, there's 2 cars for 3 people. I mean, why do we need that many? It doesn't make sense. And if you think of the complete lack of proportion, this social injustice is really seen in climate change, because North America emits 200 times more CO2 than Zambia. Qatar, 2,000 more times than Afghanistan. So, what are they raving about African population increasing? They will increase, but so what? They contribute to 1/200 of greenhouse gas effect. So even there are 20% or 30% more to reach 9 billion that we might stabilize by then, this is not the issue. The issue is emitting 200 times more than other regions of the world. So that's about things which are really not necessary. You have a big iPad and you want the mini, then the mini is too small, you want the big one. But this is no end. And this is not necessary for a good life. So some people speak of voluntary simplicity, happy sort of to be happily sober. The problem is people think of reducing this kind of materialistic goals as some kind of really painful deprivation. We are going to stop eating ice cream and all this stuff. But it's not even true. That's again the real, from the Buddhist perspective, it's really an illusion of looking for happiness in the wrong place. There's a sentence in the Way of the Bodhisattva of Shantideva said, we really want happiness, but we turn our back to it. We don't want suffering, but we rush toward the sharp blade of the law of cause and effect. So why? I mean, even psychologists have studied that. Tim Kasser is a sociologist, psychologist who studied the effect of having a high consumeristic mind. He took 10,000 people, followed them for 15 years. He took the 25% more consumption-minded, those who, when they feel bad, they go on a shopping spree, who have these strong extrinsic values, having the latest car, most fashionable clothes, their image. That's what matters. So there's a number of criteria. Then you take the 20% less minded for that. They have more emphasis on intrinsic value, friendships, quality of social relationship, enjoying nature, enjoying a moment quiet at home, meditation, whatever. So what he found is that the highest quartile of high consumer, as consumer or materialistic value, extrinsic values, they look for hedonic pleasures, not for what we call hedonic deep satisfaction. And they fail. They're not really happy. They're less happier than the others. They have less friends. They have maybe professional relationship and so forth, but less real friends. They are less healthy because their lifestyle usually is excessive, smoking, drinking, whatever. They also, interestingly, are more obsessed with death or worried about death. They have less empathic. They care less about global issues like environment. So his conclusion is, he said, I'm not a moralist. I just look at the numbers. If you want to be happy, to have friends, to be healthy, to be concerned by global issues, you should know that it's not by increasing your thirst for what makes someone to really want to succeed materially. Nothing wrong if you really keep that clear goal. I want just very utilitarian way to get a lot of means to help a lot of people. Then fine. But the problem is most of us will get lost in that. So now, I haven't been to a movie hall for many years, just it didn't happen for at least 40 years. But I do see sometimes movies in aeroplanes and at people's home. So I saw one movie where there was, two guys who were doing this kind of special idea of changing the clock at 5 minutes before midnight in international banking, anyway, some stuff like that. There was the first Sean Connery, the first James Bond guy, and one lady, very smart, doing that. So at the end of the story, they succeeded. They got $4 billion, managed to get out of the world banks everywhere. And then the lady tries to, get everything for herself and leaves Sean Connery out of it. So he finds out, and he tells her, I think that's a very nice sentence. He says, what can you do with 4 billion that you cannot do with 2? I think that's quite deep, because if it's for yourself, nothing. There's nothing that you cannot buy, and everything you cannot do with $2 billion. It's like $2,000 million. What can you do? So certainly not. But if you do it for others, you can do much more. If I have $4 billion today, I know exactly what I'm going to do. So I think if you are able to keep that motivation, and fortunately there are increasing number of young people. I have a friend who teaches at the Harvard Business School. He said compared to 20 years ago, at least 30% of my students now will want to go in the humanitarian world. So that's a very good sign. And the revolution of the NGOs, there are millions of NGOs in the world. This is a grassroots movement that is the quiet revolution from the grassroots, not the government, not the big companies, the civil society. So that's happening too. So, it all depends on your motivation. But I think for a young person, you need a really steady motivation to keep that all the way and not being lured by the temptation. I think my dear friend Venerable Hing Kong, who used to be in the financial world before. So like that, you know, if you do it, no, I mean, I'm sure if you give me a few millions, I know what to do. But, you know, you might lose your way doing so.
The lady in the front.
Venerable Ricard, thanks for your very wonderful lecture. Myself, I work, my name is Meng. I work in NGO, charity, what you experienced. In my experience is that 20 years ago, I thought that development is very wonderful. And now I reflect, and I thought that it actually helps a lot of development in terms of economics, better life when people want to have, after one car, they want second car and third car, second television or third fridge. It keeps on coming, all this demand. I do not see development agency being able to enhance solidarity, cooperation, harmony, sustainability, what you said. From your experience, how NGOs can work with religious group, and so there could be more values to add on a lot of economic projects they think will benefit the world. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you. It's a very complex issue, and there are many questions in your question in a way. So first, about religious group, I think many people who try to intervene in some areas have found that working with them is extremely efficient. For instance, like typically the example of polio vaccination that failed because some religious group in northern Nigeria thought it was bad, and they were trying to, I don't know, give AIDS to Muslim women or things like that. So it failed and delayed the eradication of polio by several years. Now that they got them on board, everybody goes along. So for many of those social issues, to mobilize existing religious networks is very powerful. That's one thing. Now, about development per se, again, you know, it's such a complex issue. I mean, it's clear that if you were to bring literacy, easily, you know, cheaper access to energy like solar or rainwater collection, it would improve people's life a lot. You know, just to give you one example, we know that if a girl had at least 6 months of education, minimum, just 6 months, it significantly decreases child and mother mortality. So this kind of things is clear. Now, the thing is not to go to the other extreme, to just, that's why the change of culture is necessary. To do so while, you know, applying this idea like sustainable harmony or something in the development, embed, not just, you know, teaching them ways to even try to use more and more of the limited natural resources. So again, it's a change of culture that can be educated and inspired by what we know from science, from the present situation. So I think reducing inequalities doesn't mean that everyone will not, you know, emit 200 times more CO2. It's more achieving sustainable harmony means a balance. That those who consume too much stop doing so, and those who don't have enough at least have what they require. So that's why the complaint from India and China, you know, you got everything, now you don't want us to do that. But it's impossible to get everything at that level. We have to be a rebalancing of stopping this exaggerated, unnecessary consumption. We have to decrease. There's no other way. And then bringing up those who are below the poverty line. So there has to be some kind, it doesn't mean redistributing wealth, which never works, never happened, but somehow avoiding these extremes, disparity of the use of energy, of wealth, and so forth, because that's not healthy for a society. So whatever way you do to rebalance that, we have to find this kind of balance and harmony. So something like that. You know, it's a puzzling matter. I'm far from being an expert. I try to listen to many possibilities, but clearly with the environment we have no much choice not to do that, because otherwise everybody will go in the drain. It's whatever, we will all be in the same boat.
The gentleman at the back.
Yes, sir, and thanks again. You noted that in North America, and I think your statistic was there was something like a 60% burnout rate with health professionals. And I had two sort of follow-on questions. The first one is this a developed world problem or simply a North American problem? Second of all, when you introduce compassion, which you talked about in your MRI example, does that reduce burnout?
Well, the study I know, and I've seen repeated recently, the study I know was done a few years ago, and just I think in one of the latest Time magazine, it's not a scientific journal, but they were echoing something like 50% again. I don't know how, if it has been studied in the same way in Europe, but it's well-known phenomena anyway for sure. So now, in terms of, it was interesting that ethnically there was differences in burnout, even in the medical personnel, that Hispanics and Black Americans had a little bit less burnout, probably because they have a much stronger community life and social support. That was one of the hypotheses. But in any case, it's sort of more anecdotal. But what matters is, yes, the study that Tanya Singer has done from the pilot study over 10 days, but now she did a year-long study with, as I mentioned, 350 subjects, volunteers, divided in different groups. One group will do mindfulness practice, one group will do what they call perspective taking, thinking about being in the place of the other, and one group will do this metta or loving kindness meditation. And then they will change the order. Some group will start with number 1, and then 2 and 3. Some will start with mindfulness, some will start with compassion, so to minimize the order effect. And then there was a control group doing something about memory and stuff like that, with good educators, entertaining coaches, but nothing to do with this. So what she found, and there's a result that's still to be published, but this major longitudinal study was financed by European Commission. She found that mindfulness doesn't increase prosocial behavior at all. It reduces stress to some extent, but it's no impact on affective empathy or prosocial behavior. Perspective taking improves a little bit, but not that much, but a huge increase in this human warmth and prosocial behavior. And remitting to empathy is the loving kindness meditation. That's a huge, very visible, no-brainer result. So the idea would be, and then she did this 10 days of, first empathy, then adding compassion, and she found after 10 days only, if people just do empathy, they really feel bad after 10 days. They see suffering everywhere, they get quite overwhelmed already. But then if she add the compassion meditation, all those distressing symptoms disappear. So clearly, it works as an antidote. So the idea now, she wants to do something called resource. It looks like resources, but in fact, it's a series of abbreviations, which is a nice name as well. And she wants to do like a startup, not to make money, of course, but because it needs to be spread in different areas, and the Max Planck Institute is not about financing social change. And so she wants to do that. And then, I think this could be it measure sort of contribution to alleviating suffering of the social workers. And also not only alleviating, but also they can help much better. There's another study, they asked the patient, how do you feel you have been treated by your caretakers, whether it's nurses, doctors, or something. And then they evaluate the degree of burnout of those caregivers. And they found that when someone is in burnout, the subjective perception of the patient is that they're not properly taken care by those people, because they don't want to see more suffering. If a child says, I have in pain, they say, no, you are making it up. They just want to cut it short. So they they are no more equipped to take care of the people who suffer because it's too painful for themselves. So everyone is losing in that, so it's a major issue. And I think this kind of intervention, of course, things takes little time. Now we have this result, but before it actually comes into the medical curriculum, it might take a few years. But I think the strength of that study, it is 30 researchers for 1 year, big financing, very, very solid scientific protocols. This is going to be a kind of major contribution in that direction. Yes.
My question is difficult to phrase as a question, but all my friends on Facebook tend to focus upon the current affair of the refugees from the Middle East. I find myself arguing against this as it's a secondary problem to the primary cause. Do you feel that's a proper way to do it, or that it will be more altruistic and more moral to focus on the refugees and not the root cause of their flight?
So I understood only half of the question, I'm sorry.
So.
Can you, where are you? Oh, I see. Would you mind repeating? Sorry, I'm a little bit losing my hearing capacities.
My friends on Facebook talk a lot about the refugee problem or
Yes.
refugee issue in the Middle East.
Uh-huh.
I find myself arguing against them quite frequently as they tend to ignore the root cause of the problem. And I feel morally justified and superior because I'm trying to solve a bigger problem. Is that appropriate?
Huh? Oh yes, sorry, yes, thank you so much. Yes. Well, when I was in the US about the altruism books, at least a few times people say, well, what do you do with ISIS, with the altruism? But this is, I think, the wrong question. It's like, none of these things came out of the blue. No child 4 or 5 years old is thinking I'm going to cut people's head and do terrible things. So there's long-term reason and conditions for that to happen, that we are neglected for such a long time. So when the forest is in fire, yes, we have to call the fireman and do something. And then again and again, we wait till the things are such in extreme condition that whether it's refugee because of inequalities or climate change or insecurity or persecution. So then we're faced with this huge crisis and people react in many ways, open the border, close the borders. Then we are moved by some dramatic images and then we say, no, we open the border a little bit, but not too much. So this is a nightmare. But all these things had roots we have neglected. And then when everything becomes so bad, everybody says, oh, what should we do, this and that. But if for years and years we had promoted education, openness, gender equalities, then maybe this will not be ablaze now. I remember listening after when the US helped the Afghan to kick out the Russian from Afghanistan. And I heard the then Secretary of State, I think it was called Brezhnevsky or something like that, on the BBC saying when the final stage occurred, he said, now we are going to help you rebuild your school, your hospital, and even your mosque, he said. I remember that very clearly. Nothing was done. They left all the bazookas and weapons and things like that then Taliban got their hands on. Nothing was done, basically. Then after 20 years, of course, the resentment and all that fermented slowly, then it sort of blew up. They called Bin Laden to come from Saudi Arabia and all these things happened. But if we had seized that opportunity, not just the US, of course, I'm not US bashing at all, it's just any international help would have seized that window opportunity that was there to really improve the education for girls at the time where it was possible. It was long before the Taliban got in. So that time, where it seems relatively now it's okay, Afghanistan is free again, and then that was the time. So that's always this lack of long-term vision that makes us only react with time of crisis. And time of crisis, then sometimes extreme violence, whether we have to use equally powerful means, and it's again, chain reaction. So that's the problem, I think. It's always lack of long-term vision. No magic solution, but every genocide, there was precursor science years before. I met a French Jesuit father. He came 5 consecutive years to Paris telling them about the Khmer Rouge. It is coming, it's going to be terrible, and nobody sort of paid much attention. Same in Rwanda, there was science. But if you don't pay attention, then everybody is up and down when things happen. So I think that's what maybe change of culture can help. We are more careful, we are more considerate, we are more attentive, and then we don't need to resort to extreme remedies. Something like that. So how are we doing with time? Maybe, yes.
Yeah, that gentleman.
Thank you very much for your words. I was thinking as you were speaking about compassion, that since I was a child I would be volunteered by my mother to go and collect door to door for Christian Aid. And you see another side to humanity when you're asking for people's charity on their doorstep. And people will often say in Britain, charity begins at home. It's a phrase that I really detest. But I think perhaps we're reasonably good at being compassionate so long as we set limits. So we can be compassionate to our own family, or to our community, or to whichever grouping that we identify with, or our nation. And I was thinking as we were considering the refugee crisis that Britain, I don't think, was terribly bothered when it was in Greece and Italy, but when there were refugees in Calais on our doorstep, then suddenly it changed and we became compassionate. So how do we encourage people to widen their hearts and
Yes.
to be more daring in their altruism?
Yes. Thank you. Well, you see, that's the real challenge to altruism, is how to extend it. Because it's not too difficult to be kind to people who are good to us, or to our children, or to vulnerable people close to us. We can just ordinary psychological level, but if we see at evolutionary level, it makes sense. It's the parental care of the vulnerable, or parents, or dear ones. Those scientists will say genetically related. We don't have to train for that. There are exceptions. There are people who do misbehave with their own children and those they are in charge of. But that's kind of, mostly counterproductive. So now, to extend that's where it needs some kind of mind training. The Dalai Lama speaks of biological altruism. That is very easy to be with our own children. It's naturally, it's in the instinct. It doesn't require training. It doesn't require a lot of thinking. So why do we need to move to the next step to extend it beyond our kins, beyond those who have our genes, or beyond those of the same religion or creed, or the border of one nation, knowing that borders are so artificial in a way? So that needs to be a kind of sort of progress. A kind of, process of saying, okay, I want my children to be happy, and I can feel unconditional love to my child. But then, what's so different? Another child, joking, as beautiful as this little child I show, or this little girl. What's the difference? So we can be actually, it has been shown that women who had children, they're also more compassionate with other children, because that's sort of spill over. But that's still, it's still sort of children. But then why stop to children? What's wrong that when we are over 10 years old, somehow we don't deserve compassion anymore? Too bad. And so then we think, okay, fine, all the people who behave well. That's different. That's moral judgment. But people who don't behave well, we could see them as sick person. They are somewhere sick in their mind. Someone with dominated by hatred is sick with hatred. He's not hatred. When you have the flu, you don't go to doctor saying, "Doctor, I'm the flu." So you have also sick, disturbed, maddened by hatred. So somehow, compassion there is not approving the behavior, but seeing that the person is the slave of that hatred somehow. So then that person deserves compassion while hatred doesn't require any mercy. So like that, it needs some training, it needs some opening, it needs some reasoning, and it needs some sustained sort of changing our attitude, what we call mental training, meditation, or whatever. It needs a cognitive, affective process that somehow we extend, and then at the end we say, why should we exclude anyone? Say, okay, all sentient beings except 12 that I cannot stand. Then you say, okay, it doesn't make sense. Let's put them in, and that's it. So something like that. And that could be, take years of going from a limited, biased compassion to unconditional. And of course, it doesn't mean you are stupid. It doesn't mean you are tolerating people who misbehave, because that's not compassionate. To let someone abuse others, whether it's children or exert violence like ISIS, it's not being compassionate to the victims, not being compassionate to the perpetrators, because they make a hell for everyone, including themselves. So then you can be firm, but not with hatred. Firm with compassion, with wisdom, and with using skillful means. So that even requires even more sort of, big mind to be able to deal with that level of ambiguity with someone who's doing terrible things. How do we apply that? It's not at all to the action at all, but it is to the terribly sick people in a way. So sick people deserve heavy treatment in a way. So in that sense, this can happen. And in the end, you see no reason to have barriers. And even to other species. Why should we suddenly make a barriers? Then we say, okay, chimpanzees, they are quite like us. Okay, I put them in. And then all of my dogs. So now if you serve a good meal at night, and it's very delicious, everybody, so at the end you ask the recipe to the lady, and she says, oh, I just cook my dogs, and we'll go. Why? So we love dogs, we eat pigs, and we wear cows. Stupid, Or in France, they eat snails, but they only eat the kind which has a kind of shell. They don't eat those slugs. So they don't like homeless, basically.
So, any more questions? Okay, no. Thank you once again for Venerable Matthieu Ricard's very inspiring lecture. As a token of gratitude to Venerable, we have prepared a little souvenir, and now let's invite Venerable Hin Hong, our center director, to present the souvenir. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
We very much hope that Venerable can come to Hong Kong again very soon to share his wisdom with us again.
Okay.
It's our center's publication.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, I forgot to speak about caring mindfulness. Just 2 seconds, okay? Everybody speaks of mindfulness. That's great. It was started by John Kabat-Zinn about the medical world. So medical world people suffer. So compassion comes naturally. No problem. Now mindfulness in cooperation is getting more and more. That little bit could be misunderstood. And I give the example of the mindful sniper and the mindful psychopath. A sniper has to be very mindful. I mean, of course, it's a wrong understanding of Buddhist mindfulness, which goes intimately with ethics. But the way it's sometimes taught, be in the present moment. The sniper has to be in the present moment. Not distracted, yes, too. Not swayed by emotion, yes. Non-judgmental, of course, kills everybody. So, and psychopath the same. So to avoid that, you need caring mindfulness, because you don't have caring snipers and caring psychopaths. So, just as.
Thank you very much.
So you can do aerobics in the morning.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Venerable, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor.